just so much more we could do if we're actually putting the young person first. It is actually really important that young people that have the motivation, attitude, and commitment are extended and stretched to support their development. And that's both, physically, emotionally, tactically, in their preferred sport. And this obviously then requires, a selection process or a trial at the right time. But the challenge I think we all face is how it's done, how those processes are put in place, and that there are actually consistent processes there, and they are actually looking at the whole person. And that, when we start to make these selections, it's really important that there are opportunities for other people to still play. It's not a you're in and you're out. It's also not you're in and you're in for good, that there's entry and exit points later, and it's not you're shutting the gate. And we're also very aware that, resourcing and time's a challenge when we start to head into these processes, especially if we're putting better practice in the youth space. So what I'm going to do really quickly over sort of a couple of minutes is just frame up a really basic framework that the panelists will connect to when we start to move into the next discussion. So in terms of this framework, look, the first thing, really, in a sense, quite obvious, and something that gets talked about, is making sure that we're thinking of the person first. Talked about a lot, but a lot often easier said than done. So it's a no-brainer, but quite often it gets forgotten about or not thought through as much as it could or should. And there you'll also see that this word holistic, hawara, however you'd like to sort of frame it, but actually looking at the whole person, not just the physical, technical, tactical. And the other thing in here is how we look at these processes in and out. So when young people are in this selection or trial process, as well as what happens when we come out. So really ensuring we're thinking about both steps there. The next sort of piece of the framework I'd like just to frame up and is actually the purpose. Like, do we actually need to have a trial or a selection process? Is it required? Or is this just something that has been there and it's just tradition and we just keep doing it because we've always done it? So it's just another really important consideration to think about the purpose of it. And wrapped up into that is, well, how does it connect with competition? So what's the competitive purpose or the development purpose that we're actually selecting some youth for a certain event or program? Just being really clear about why we're doing it, because the question might be where it's not required. And the last sort of point in this basic framework before I throw over to the panelists is just thinking about the environment itself and the systems within the environment. So communication, Chris, you touched on this earlier, but communication so before this trial or selection process, during, what are the messages during, and also afterwards. We've probably all been or seen processes where people don't know what's happening. They get there, something goes on, and then, they're told they make it or they don't afterwards. And there's just so much more we could do if we're actually putting the young person first. How it should feel. So when people actually come to these trial and selection processes, our rangatahi, are people there welcoming them, creating a nice mood in terms of the environment, or, are there clipboards out, people are walking around? It's quite emotive as such, rather than actually bringing people in, helping them feel comfortable and express themselves in a play-like environment. So even the language and the words that are used are really important and impressionable with young people. I won't go into too much detail, but is this a one-off trial, or is there a few trials, or actually is this an ongoing evaluation where we're continually looking at young people? And then we actually get into what we're actually looking for. Is it deficit-based or strength-based? Are we looking at the physical, technical things, and how are we looking at them? They're more quantitative. We can measure some of those things. The character is more qualitative. How are we making judgments about those things? Do we know the young people? Have we talked to other people that do? And then quite often it's not one person involved in these processes. There's half a dozen, or there's a couple of people. Have we actually taken the time to talk as a group of people that are involved to make sure we all understand the processes and what we're looking for? And the final point sort of from me here is, the weighting of, well, some of the character traits, and people that might know these young people may have coached them for 3 or 4 years before this trial process, versus people that may have only seen them briefly in 1 or 2 sort of sessions where they may have only touched a ball or done something a few times. And, are we putting a weighting on people that have been involved with these young people beforehand? And, there's some really simple questions and things we can do there.